Trish, and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very exciting guest named Mary. She has been an educator for over 32 years, and she's currently in the classroom. She wears a ton of hats. She's an academic coach, a special education teacher. She's teaching forensic science to honor students. She has done it all. And she's also worked in many different states across the grade levels, and she has even worked in a juvenile detention center. So I'm sure she has stories for days. But she's going to really tell us about what it's been like over these past 3 decades and how education has changed. So I think a big controversy online is whether or not today's students are different than, when we were going to school or earlier. Have you seen a substantial change in students over the past 3 decades?
Yes. I think we never should have developed past the flip phone. That's my theory. I think once we had the flip phone, it was good. You could make your calls, you could check your first 3 emails. But yes, students have changed so much. I know a lot of people say kids haven't changed, but I really think they have. I think all of the social media and things like that have just made kids definitely different, especially where I work, because where I work now, and I've been there, this is my 23rd year, it's kind of a rural area and there's a lot of farms. So like a lot of the kids were very into mechanics, and they were very self-sufficient, and they worked on farms, and they could pretty much do everything. And now it's definitely changing to a lot more, we have to take selfies on Instagram and do our TikTok dance and all, so yeah, it's changed a lot. I think kids have changed. I think that social media has definitely, changed us for the worst, in my opinion.
Definitely.
And parenting has changed. I think a lot has changed.
I'd love to hear how classroom management is different now, because I know it's so different from region to region. Some people report that they can't use any punitive consequences. Some places are more traditional. So what have you seen work and not work in terms of classroom management?
My school is definitely a lot more in the middle there. We discipline, and we do suspensions, and we do in-school suspensions. But they're definitely for the most egregious offenses, like, vaping, drugs, or, it's mostly just marijuana, but you know what I mean? Or things like, fighting and stuff like that. So our school is kind of in the middle. Like, we do discipline for the, like I said, for the biggest offenses, but then we do let a lot of stuff ride too. Basically, being in special education, when I first started out, I worked with most of the population was, at the time, they called them seriously emotionally disturbed. Now they call it emotional regulation. So there wasn't a lot you could do discipline wise, because it was a manifestation of the disability. You know what I mean? So basically, at one point, I was in a room with 17 students. I had 1 assistant, I had 1 aide, 17 kids. I think 10 of them were on probation. That was in Pennsylvania. So, and it was a self-contained class for kids with emotional disturbance. And there wasn't a lot discipline wise. Like, it was basically my aide and I, it was us. That was all we had, so for me, it's always been, and I said this 30 years ago when I started, and it's the same, they asked how I was able to manage kids. I said I had a good relationship with them. And in 30 years ago, they didn't want to hear that in interviews. Now everything's relationship. You're not going to teach a kid that you don't have a relationship with, or a kid that doesn't like you. It's just a prerequisite. It just is what it is, so I realized that early on, and I guess that's why I'm still teaching 32 years later, and I got pretty lucky. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's all about relationships now. But back then too, it was, I think, probably because of the population I worked with at the time. You know what I mean?
That makes sense. So how do you develop a relationship with a student that is oppositional, defiant, or maybe has issues with authority? Have you found things that work? Because I know when I was a teacher, I would hear that a lot too, like build relationships, but with curriculum and testing and just things moving so fast, I found that really difficult sometimes. So what has worked for you in that area?
I wish I could put it in a book. I wish I could sell it. It's so hard to pinpoint. I think I try to be very professional and businesslike in the beginning, but still show I care. A lot of times too, I had the same students pretty much for 4 years. So other students will see the relationship I have, and that affects, students. I had a kid who 2 years ago who was giving me a really rough time. And it was the first time I've had a kid like that who gave me that hard of a time in maybe 10 years. and he was cursing me out, and two of my other students who are like, they're two of the biggest, baddest boys in the building, I'll tell you right now. And they came in and they're like, why are you talking to her like that? Like, you don't treat her like that. Like, you know what I mean? We care about her. She's our teacher. She cares about us. And, you're not going to talk to her like that. And that took care of the problem. I was shocked. You know what I mean? So yeah, luckily I think I've always kind of worked with the baddest boys in the school, and they were the people I had a relationship with. At one point I used to go homebound in gang territory in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, because I knew all the gangbangers. Like, so all the criminals knew me. So they would send me to homebound girls that, were pregnant or, weren't able to go to school for psychiatric reasons or whatever, because I knew all the criminals in town. So nobody was going to give me a hard time. I mean, I was walking into houses with bullet holes in the house from drive-by. But I knew everybody, so I was good to go. Now I don't work with those kind of population. Now it's mostly most of my students are Caucasian, So but yeah, I wish I knew. If I could bottle it and sell it, I'd be a millionaire. I wouldn't still be teaching.
Yeah, that's always what I try to figure out. I don't know if I've always heard that, you want to be warm yet stern. And I've heard, be business-like yet let them know you have a fun side. So I just wonder if there's a certain personality type that's really good for teaching and some that are just not. Because I would find myself most of the time by nature being too nice, but then I feel like I would try to firm it up and they'd be like, oh, you're so mean. So I just couldn't figure it out. So I always just like to ask people. So it sounds like you have generally had that maybe the students haven't been your biggest problem in education, that you've liked them, you've gotten along with them. And that's not something everybody could say. So what would you say has been your biggest problems or annoyances with just modern education?
My biggest problems have been coworkers and administrators. Basically, I've had less problems with the students. I mean, I think teenagers are just so much more easy to deal with than adults, to tell you the truth. I've been harassed by coworkers. I was actually stalked by a coworker. Now my principal now, she's great, but I've had principals treat me like I wasn't even a human being, and I'm working with the toughest kids in the school most of the time, except, not recently, but, I don't know why they would treat me like that. Like, yeah, so that's mostly been my biggest problems. The kids really haven't, believe it or not. Like, thank God I've never been hit. I've had kids where I've seen it in their eyes, it flashed in their eyes like they're going to hit me. I think part of it's been I've been a woman dealing with male juvenile offenders. I don't think I could have gone into, work with girls that were juvenile offenders, because a guy has nothing to prove against a woman, in my opinion. I've heard that the girls are harder for women to deal with, but I would see the guys, like the boys in juvenile detention. Well, some were almost 18. They would want to fight like the staff members, like there's nothing to prove against a woman. And I think now that I'm older, I kind of have like the older aunt, cool aunt type of thing going on. So like, I think that helps too. Sometimes the kids like you more if you're older. I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe it's, the mom figure that they don't have or whatever. I'm seeing I get along with the kids better now that I'm getting older. It's really weird. I can't explain it. I wish I had more answers for you, but I don't. But
I have heard a lot of teachers say that, and I think I've seen that before. And I was just like, because I think it's so difficult, because in modern education, I think there's a lot of one size fits all models, and they say, just do this and it'll be fine. But I really think, even though it's not popular to say, sometimes age can make you do better with certain students. Like you said, male versus female, depending on the population. It's a lot of times just things that are outside of our control a little bit. But I do think there's some just age old principles that kind of seem to transfer no matter where you go. So if you were talking with a new teacher and they were just struggling with their classroom management, or just even with coworkers, what's some like age old advice that you would give to them that's kind of helped you throughout all these years to stay in the classroom?
I think the most important thing is you're teaching human beings first and content second. And you can't get tripped up by the content, and I think a lot of teachers who leave, they really love the subject. They really want to impart that knowledge of the subject onto the students. And I think that that's where they become disillusioned. These are people. They're coming to you with all their traumas, all their all their experiences, all their history, all their biases. And you have to realize that they're people first, and then the content comes second. And I know that that absolutely sucks in America, where there's all this pressure on us, to get these test scores and to do this and to do that. But the bottom line is, if you don't have a relationship first and you don't have that human connection with them, you're not going to impart that knowledge onto them. And luckily, my principal now, she believes in, she's definitely, even her quote is, students won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So luckily, I think that like our administration definitely sees that, so that's good. And I'm at a very small school too now. We have under 400 kids in the school. So that really helps too. But I worked at schools that, graduate 1,000 kids too. But I think that, the small atmosphere and the fact that our administration does understand that, these kids need to know you care.
Definitely. So would you say overall you found teaching to be a fulfilling, joyful career? What are your feelings in general? And if you had a loved one, would you recommend that they go into education these days?
I have to say it's been hard. It's been a lot of soul searching. There's a lot of reflective practicing you need to do. I lied awake a lot of nights, trying to figure out what the heck I did wrong, because you make so many mistakes. And if I'm a perfectionist, and it's so hard to make those mistakes and then go back to the kids and say, listen, I really screwed up yesterday. I should have done this. And I've even had kids say to me, you're the first adult that ever came into my life that admitted they screwed up. So, I have to say, if I had to choose a career now, no. Would I recommend people going into it? No. I'm also our school's co-advisor for Future Educators of America, and we have some kids that want to do it no matter what, so I do try to tell them, listen, this is what you're up against. I have to say, I really would not trade these last 30 years with my students for anything. I'm going to get choked up a little bit, but yeah, that's how I feel about it. So was I going to start tomorrow? No way. Would I have had these past 30 years any other way? No way, if that makes sense.
It does.
As you can tell, I'm a very middle of the road person. That's probably the personality you need. I don't know.
I do understand. So what do you think about teaching would make you say that you wouldn't recommend it in spite of how much you love your students? Because I think that's probably the biggest struggle with so many teachers' hearts. They're like, man, I love these kids, but this job is killing me. So what are some of those specific things that just kind of make you think, if I had it to do all over again, maybe not, in spite of how much I love the kids?
It's the political landscape. It's just the way America is right now. I'm a freakish follower of true crime and the news and things like that. So that's, I teach the forensics. And I just see what's out there. I see how teachers are being treated. I see how people think we're indoctrinating kids. And I see these wonderful people that I work with who really care so much, and they're treated like crap. I mean, for lack of a better word, it is just, our political landscape is terrible. We don't live in a society conducive to raising children, in my opinion. We live in a horrible, it's just getting horrible. I hate to be the biggest Debbie Downer in the world, and sometimes I just have to get away from the social media and the news and all that. But it's the political landscape. It's these kids today. Sadly, when I started teaching, a kid's whole sense of self-worth wasn't based on their Instagram likes. You know what I mean? Bullying didn't follow you 24 hours a day with your cell phone, and I see a lot of teachers now, especially teachers my age, that they don't seem to understand what the political landscape is now. And it's sad to me, because they're raising kids. I don't have kids, but it's just sad. I can't even imagine being, a 12-year-old girl, and I hate myself because I only got 5, likes on my Instagram picture. These, it's a horrible world these kids are growing up in nowadays. And I didn't grow up in that world, and not that there weren't problems back when, then, but now with social media has just added a whole new layer of things.
Yeah, and all of that kind of shows up in the classroom. It's like school is like a microcosm of society. So all the problems in the outer world just kind of leach their way into the classroom. And so I'm curious, what changes have you seen with administration and even the expectations and pressure that's put upon teachers?
I think back in the day, we had much more old-fashioned administrators. like the principal that, the kid was terrified to go into the principal's office. You know what I mean? I had that principal, if you hit somebody, he would just basically say, I'm going to rip off your arm and then you won't be able to hit them again. Like that was how, Mr. Gigerelli, shout out to Mr. Gigerelli, my elementary principal, you were terrified. You know what I mean? You could even get the paddle back when I went to school. Like you could pick the paddle or you could pick detention. Most people would just get paddled. They didn't want to sit around in detention, So I think, and administrators now, their hands are tied. Kids have all the power. We have no power. I'm under no illusion that a kid is going to do something that I say just because I say it. You know what I mean? I think we've had to definitely change our, we have to motivate them now to do it. And that's not easy because these kids aren't motivated by anything nowadays. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's definitely the difference in administration. I've seen, their hands are tied because, the way parenting is nowadays, back in the day, I mean, if the teacher called home, you would go home and you were in 10 times more trouble, and I was kind of that kid who was a little bit of a troublemaker. So like, I'd get it twice as bad when the teacher called. Nowadays it's, the kid can't wait for the teacher to call home because mom's going to tell the teacher off. You know what I mean? So there's that. Yeah, everybody's hands are tied and teachers are just being vilified, but I don't think anybody cares more than we do. I think we're the wrong people to pick on, I mean, I didn't give birth to these kids. I'm doing the best I can to help you raise them, but I'm not responsible. You know what I mean? And they're with me 8 hours a day. The rest of the time, you got to step it up, parents. You know what I mean?
Definitely. And I was going to ask you about that too. Have you seen a big change when you're calling home and interacting with parents, or do you feel like it's a little different since you work mostly with the special ed population? Do the parents support you more? How has that worked for you?
I see both. I think well, I work with kids that are moderately to like more severely disabled, and I think the parents kind of expect you to make their kid neurotypical. Like I'll get things like I got an email from a parent saying that their son didn't know how to take the plastic off a bag of bread. Well, to me that's something then show them at home. Like, so I see that I see them expecting us more to teach their kids everything and raise their kids than they used to. Most of my parents, though, I have to say, I've been lucky that I've had support from from the parents, and I really don't have that many problems where I need to call home. And a lot of times with the kind of kids that I have, it probably would just be a waste of my time to call home. You're not going to get support from home. I've had parents say, it's your problem when he's at school, deal with it. You know what I mean? I've had parents say, I don't know what the heck to do. So do you have any suggestions for me? You get those parents too. So I think everything runs the gamut now. You can get a little bit of everything.
Definitely. And have you seen teacher workload increase over the years, or have you kind of figured out time-saving strategies so that you're not taking home as much work?
I've got all the strategies. Yeah. In the beginning, it was just crazy because in the beginning it was self-contained. So I taught every subject to kids that were, borderline IQs to gifted IQs. That's what I was dealing with in a self-contained class. So it was just, the workload was crazy. I had to go borrow everything from the other teachers. Nowadays it's more like silly paperwork stuff. Like we have to do this thing where we have student growth objectives. Another problem we have is in New Jersey, if the students don't pass the state test, they have to do a portfolio class. And here go the dogs. So we have the requirements for the state that are, that you have to basically prove that your students achieved something. So that's a big, long paperwork thing. Then there's every year you have to get 20 hours of professional development. So you got to get that in. Like there's all that crazy stuff. So yeah, definitely the paperwork has increased. The good thing about it in New Jersey is I don't have to do much of the special education paperwork. They have social workers to do that. In Pennsylvania, that was astronomical. I had like 75 students, and they kept uncapping the caseload and the paperwork that special ed teachers do. I mean, I'm so fortunate to be in New Jersey, which is part of the reason I went to New Jersey. But yeah, just the paperwork load for special education teachers, and then some of these Some of these, they have to do functional behavioral analysis. Those are pages and pages long. Interventions that they have to impart. I saw a special education teacher for one lesson with the student to keep his hands and his feet to himself. He had like booklets and videos, and I'm like, how did that man plan all that just for one skill for one student? You know what I mean? So yeah, the special education paperwork is just astronomical. It's just crazy. I could never go back to doing it. If they told me today, like, you're going back to Pennsylvania, I'd be like, heck no, I'm retiring right now. I'm not going to do all that. So yeah, it's just insane. And it's just more and more and more, but we're putting more and more on teachers, and we're accomplishing less and less. We always keep, with education, it's take the baby and toss it out with the bathwater. That's what we do in education. And it's just, we need to stick to something that works, or these scripted, thank goodness we don't have these scripted lesson plans that some of these like southern states are, and everybody's got to be in the, thank goodness I don't have to deal with any of that. And our administration, like you have total creative license to teach. So that's why I'm still teaching. And a lot of people aren't.
I think that's so interesting how things vary so much from state to state. And I'm curious, we've kind of touched on some of these things, but what do you really wish that the public knew about a teacher's job, whether it's parent, student, admin, the society as a whole? What do you think people are really misunderstanding about a teacher's role?
I think they don't understand how much we care. We're only doing this because we care. Otherwise, we would be doing something else and probably making a lot more money. I'll say that first. Second, I think they just don't realize how tiring it is to meet everyone's needs. I think probably parents of maybe 10 children would understand the best. If you have all these kids with all these needs, and now all this trauma, and and all these notifications on their phones, and just all the noise and all the craziness. And it's just, people just don't understand how difficult it is to just start a simple worksheet, with 20 people in the room with 20 different agendas and 20 different things going on. People just don't realize how difficult it is to get started. They think the teacher stands in front of the room and, you just start teaching and it's magic, because that's how a lot of people remember school. So I think that's what people don't get. I think they don't get the struggle. They really don't. And you don't get it unless you're in the classroom. And everybody thinks they know because everybody went to school. I'm sure you've experienced this. So I went to school. I know what it's like. No, you don't. And you don't know what it's like from the teacher's perspective either, because you never stood in front of 20 teenagers and tried to get them to do something.
Definitely. Well, I also like to ask people, as one of my closing questions, if you had a magic wand and could change anything in education, what would you change?
I would go back to the flip phone. I would wave my magic wand and we would be back to flip phone times when there wasn't Instagram and there wasn't Facebook, and we only had MySpace and it was only for the bands. And that's, if I could wave my magic wand, that's what I would do. Because and a lot of my teacher friends agree with me. And I think that was the downfall of society when we went past the flip phone. But I'm all about the flip phone.
I totally hear ya. Well, this has been super fun. I'm just so grateful for your wealth of knowledge. And you said you have about 3 more years until you're retiring.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but who's counting? 3 years and a quarter and a half.
Awesome. Do you have any fun plans for afterward?
Yeah, I'm gonna continue to indulge my true crime passion, and I'm probably gonna follow all my favorite cases. Maybe get a van. And follow all my favorite cases in the United States. And I definitely want lots of traveling. I want to get an RV and I want to go see everything.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mary. And audience, thank you so much for watching. If you ever want to interview with me, feel free to email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. And if you have any show ideas for the future, let me know in the comment section. Thank you guys again for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.